Hello and welcome back to the channel. A couple of months ago I posted a video ranking the films of Steven Spielberg. At the bottom of the list I put Ready Player One, a film which I stated stood apart from the rest of Spielberg's output by being actively a bad film in my view. After a few discussions with people who were surprised about how much I disliked the film, I decided to take some time and check on the general critical consensus. For the most part, the consensus seems to be that it's an average film, a cinematic shrug. There is praise out there for its spectacle, but it seems that even the positive appraisals acknowledge that it's a theme park ride of a film, a disposable thrill. But for me, it's a film I really do not like, and I think it's worth taking the time to talk about why. Probably the best way to approach this is going to be to break it down into a few sections before considering the film as a whole. So we'll start with some of the more finicky stuff. Though the thing I quickly want to mention first is that this film, and the book it's based on, don't know what an Easter egg is in terms of video games. An Easter egg is a surprise, often a joke, by the developers put into a game as a moment of fun or a moment of acknowledgement for the team behind the game's creation. These surprises are often hidden in obscure parts of a level or behind walls that a player is unaware can be passed through. What Easter eggs are not is something found after a series of clues given to a player as part of a mission or a quest, which then have huge impact on the rest of the player's experience. Ready Player One's Easter egg is not an Easter egg, it's a MacGuffin. Right, got that one off my chest, let's move on. I find the film's internal logic, or rather its lack of internal logic, distracting. It means I'm often left questioning the basic setup of the fictional world we're in, rather than paying attention to the actual events. You can start picking at it with one of the very core concepts of the film's fiction: how people access the Oasis. At first, we're told that people access using a virtual reality headset, a glove, and a multi-directional treadmill. But even during this opening sequence, we're shown people using it sat down at office desks, for example. Later on, we see the main villain access it through a chair-based system. People are seen running in the street whilst taking part in the final battle, but just wearing headsets. The villainous company's staff access it while seemingly stood still. There's no consistent logic to it at all. The same can be said of the Oasis itself. We are told at the beginning that you can be anything that you want to be in the Oasis, only then to be shown that you actually can't, because you need to pay for things or compete for them. But also, one of the secondary characters is also able to construct things. How? Is this connected to programming? Where do the resources come from? And how do people get money in the Oasis? Is it only picked up from defeated foes? Companies sell items within the Oasis, but it's also clearly possible for everyone to create their own items. So how does this economy actually work? Look at the early race sequence once Wade travels underneath it. We see elements of the traps for the track above being lifted into place as if everything was mechanical. But why would they not just be spawned in as they would be in an actual video game? After all, we see characters spawning in items that they need throughout the film. And is there only really one person calling themselves Percival on the entire planet? Why is the Museum of Halliday's life set up so you have to walk down long corridors, when later on we see information about Halliday being displayed like a screen from Minority Report? If IOI are trying to gain control of the Oasis, who is currently controlling the Oasis as the film events occur? And if the film's characters can hack the software to make the villain believe he has left the simulation, then why is no one else doing this? Why, at one point, can our heroes just pass through walls when others can't? The Oasis has no structure, it just does what the plot needs it to do at any given moment. There is every chance I'll reference the Matrix more than once during this, but compare the Oasis to the Matrix. One sets up its internal rules, and it's a big story point whenever these rules are subverted or changed. The other sets no rules, and so there is no impact when new things happen. It's not hard to guess which one is which. Next, I'd like to discuss the pop culture references. These references are a big part of the appeal of both the book and the film. I will specifically be discussing the references in the film, but a lot of this can also be applied to the book. A key issue for me with these references is that there is no thought behind what is being used beyond the initial, "Hey, look, you recognise that, right, audience?" For example, we see Wade get an object called a Zemeckis cube, which we learn is able to turn back time for everyone but the user. Now, Zemeckis is a reference to Robert Zemeckis, director of Back to the Future. So it's a time travel reference, fair enough. But why Back to the Future? The DeLorean does not turn back time, it travels through time. And why, visually, is it a Rubik's Cube? Apparently for no other reason than that those were popular in the 80s. It's a mishmash of a reference that sort of links to the object's purpose in the story. At one point, Wade uses the holy hand grenade of Monty Python fame, but there's no reason why it is the holy hand grenade. It's just used like a grenade. The name checking of it serves no purpose beyond, hey, look, it's that thing from that film. There's an extended sequence that references The Shining, with the set of that film being recreated. But again, there is no reason why The Shining is being used. There's no tapping into the themes of The Shining to add flavour to the themes of the film that we're watching. Again, it's just a surface level artifice, a burst of recognition that asks you not to think about why it's being used at all. And one I have seen people comment on is the use of the Iron Giant, particularly in the final big battle. A character from a film which at its core had an anti-war, anti-destruction, anti-violence message is seen tearing apart enemies and cutting others down with lasers. Clearly all they did was ask which big robot they had the rights to use, rather than actually think about the message or legacy of the character that they chose to use was. Some argue that it's not the actual Iron Giant, but just a copy. But then why use the design of the Iron Giant at all if you don't want it to be considered by the audience to be the Iron Giant? The references are just thrown out with no thought, and for me it all just builds a world where none of the characters appear to understand the meaning of the pop culture that they're all obsessed with. It's the worst part of geek fandom, where you can't be a fan if you've not got all the minutiae memorised, but it doesn't matter if you've actually understood the message underneath it all. For an example of the benefit of putting more thought into this kind of referencing, let's consider a film like Hot Fuzz. We see Danny insist that Nick watch Point Break, a film that Danny has already referenced earlier in the film. It not only plays a part in the friendship that is forming between Danny and Nick, but it is also tied into the finale of Hot Fuzz, when Danny finds himself unable to bring down his fleeing father in the same way that Johnny finds his relationship with Bodhi does the same in Point Break. An element which is reinforced by a visual callback by Hot Fuzz to Point Break. Here, the use of Point Break as a reference goes beyond, hey, remember this thing, and it is actually tied into the themes and story beats of the film that is making the reference. Character development, or rather the lack of any, is another issue, in particular in regards to the lead character. Wade has no development, no arc, he learns no lessons, he's always right. A small moment in the film is very telling in this regard. Wade is preparing to meet Artemis at a nightclub. He sees it as a date. She's not intending it to be. He picks out an outfit which references an obscure film. His friend tells him it's a bad choice, but Wade goes with it, and as soon as Artemis sees it, she's impressed by the reference he's making and thinks he's cool to know it, because of course she does. At the end of the film, a voiceover tells us that Wade has learnt to appreciate the real world as much as the Oasis, but absolutely nothing in the film up to that point conveys that at all. Through the Oasis and his knowledge of it, Wade has been given every single thing that he wants. He expresses no remorse at the family members that have been killed in the real world. There is absolutely no sign that he's learnt to appreciate the real world at all, apart from the fact that we're told so by the voiceover. He lives out a geek male fantasy in the film. His knowledge of pop culture brings him wealth, fame, and a girlfriend. A fantasy underscored by the fact that we're shown that the so-called tragedy in Halliday is of the geeky super genius who was too afraid to kiss the girl and so dies alone as a result. Everywhere else, characters are just ciphers. The female lead is just a mirror of Wade, her one differing character trait being that she's afraid people won't like her real self because she thinks that she's unattractive. Of course, in real life, she's an attractive woman who just has a birthmark. We are supposed to be surprised to find out another character is female in the real world, but the film does a poor job of pitch shifting her voice, so it's not really a surprise to the audience. Nor do any of the characters appear particularly surprised, nor has there been any thematic discussion of gender roles within the film up to this point, so it's something that has no payoff. Two Asian characters are basically just cultural stereotypes, and the villains are just evil because they work for a corporation, which is being all corporation-y. My disappointment in this film in this area is certainly connected to the fact that I expect better from a director of Spielberg's calibre. I don't think I can name another film of his where the characterizations are so bland and so lacking in development. This is another area we can compare Ready Player One to The Matrix. The Matrix has clear themes. Yes, some of them are ham-fisted and overambitious, but they are there. But what are Ready Player One's themes? What message is it trying to convey? There is a vague articulation of capitalism is bad, but then the main character's triumph is confirmed by him becoming wealthy and taking ownership of a dominant company. So, is there a message in how the lead character does come to triumph instead? Unfortunately, there isn't really. As I mentioned, Wade displays essentially no growth as a character. He wins because he's the best. We don't see him become the best, he just starts that way. Let's take a look at another example of a film that can be compared to Ready Player One. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Both are based around an eccentric figure testing others to find someone to take over their legacy. For Wonka, in the end, it's Charlie's display of moral fortitude that convinces him that Charlie is the right person to take over. Charlie, in that moment, displays something that arguably even Wonka knows that he himself lacks, a moral sense of what is right. Throughout the film, we've seen those around Charlie fail because of various character flaws, and indeed, even at one point, Charlie himself falls to temptation, but later redeems himself in Wonka's eyes. In Ready Player One, Wade succeeds not because of any underlying quality of character, but instead because of his obsessive knowledge of Halliday and the pop culture that Halliday himself was obsessed with. At no stage is Wade faced with the need to change or redeem himself. The message appears to simply be that you will be rewarded for being obsessive. Elsewhere, there is no thematic discussion of the nature of a world where a virtual environment dominates society. It's briefly mentioned at the start of the film that society in the real world is slowly collapsing and that no one is really acting to prevent it anymore. It's a thread that's never picked up again. Ready Player One is a film that comes within grasping distance of having something thematic in it, of something to say, but then it gets distracted by all the shiny things. I can't think of any other Spielberg film that has seemingly no theme at all. Even the adventures of Indiana Jones consider things like legacy, aging, fear. Ready Player One is empty of anything like that. I do think a big part of why I dislike Ready Player One as much as I do is expectation. The fact that I do expect something much better from Spielberg. If the film had come from another director, maybe I wouldn't have reacted so strongly to it. But on the other hand, the mix of inconsistent internal logic, poor character development, the flood of ill thought through pop culture references could well be enough for me to have had the same reaction anyway. Ready Player One is a cynical, calculating artifice. A call to nostalgia that we all share, but with no heart and no warmth to it, and nothing really to say. And quite possibly, it's the cynicism of the project that sours me the most to it. It has a surprising lack of care for a Spielberg film. For example, rather than the world being elegantly laid out for us, the first 10 minutes of the film are a voice-over exposition dump. And, as I've said, the pop culture references seemingly have been picked with little or no thought. And it fails to convince as an adventure. For example, one early clue is signposted so heavily when a recording of Halliday suddenly starts talking about going fast backwards for what feels like 10 minutes for no reason, that being asked to believe that Wade has made a masterstroke by spotting it fails painfully flat. The lack of care also seems present in the design of anything that isn't related to an existing piece of pop culture. All of the film's original designs are bland and forgettable. It all just feels like Spielberg went through the motions on this one, but perhaps a hollow, soulless celebration of pop culture is itself a testament to the state of large parts of pop culture today. Anyway, I hope this goes some way to explaining why I think Ready Player One is a bad film, not just an average one. Let me know what you think below. I'm sure there'll be those that disagree. But thanks for listening. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see you all again soon.